On this episode of Life Beyond the Chariot, we are joined by me, special guest. I'm Luke Arredondo, Director of Faith Formation here at the St. Philip Institute. This is a conversation about how Catholics can engage in social media without getting drawn too far into the muddy waters. So stick around and enjoy.
Welcome to Life Beyond the Chariot, a faith and family series from the St. Philip Institute. We believe we are called to not only know, but also to live the truth of the gospel within our homes, in our workplaces, and beyond. We believe we are invited to encounter Christ in the messiness of day-to-day life and to live as his disciples.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again, and this week we have another special guest, continuing our series of special guests.
Yeah, we've had quite a few.
We've had quite a few. We're joined by Dr. Luke Arredondo, the Director of Faith Formation. He's been on the show before, but how are you, Luke?
I'm doing good. When you said special guests, I didn't know there were others. So you might want to ask them about including me in the same category. It might cheapen the category.
No, we have a lot of fun every time Luke is in the studio with us, and we're talking like a couple of weeks ago and just said we haven't done anything together in a while. And so one of the things that I really love about working in the diocese is that I work with really smart people who are much smarter than I am and have thoughts on things and can articulate things in ways that I can't. And one of the things that we were just reflecting on is that we're in an age where there's just a lot of noise, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we're in an interesting time in the Diocese of Tyler. We can acknowledge that. And I think between conversations with people, but then also in the World Wide Web of the internets, the conversations that are happening there are also really loud and noisy. And there's just a lot coming at us as Catholics. And so we thought it would be good to just have a conversation about that. Luke has actually been doing a lot of research and writing on the topic as well. So Luke, where should we get started with all of this?
I don't know where to start in a lot of ways because actually, we look right now at the internet, Catholic internet or Catholic Twitter or whatever, and I think it can be easy to feel like this is a brand new problem and that it's embarrassing and gosh, those early Christians would never have fought and bickered like this. But that's really, I'm sure that's not the case. Maybe we don't have evidence of all of it, but there is some. I have a friend who, Ted, who's a patristics, sort of got a background in patristics, and I was just randomly talking with him a couple of weeks ago, and he shared this story that I think is really just gives us a good sort of historical grounding in the fact that Catholics have had embarrassing, petty arguments for a long time. So St. Ambrose, right, famous preacher who really was instrumental in converting Augustine because of his preaching. It was so elevated and eloquent and beautiful. Well, he was evidently doing a series of homilies on Luke's gospel, and they were really well received, and he was writing them in Latin. And St. Jerome got a copy of a couple of them, and someone said, "You got to check these out. These are this Ambrose guy, man. What fiery sermons he's delivering on Luke's gospel." And Jerome's looking at them, and he goes, "You stinking liar! These are not your homilies. This is Origen translated from Greek into Latin, and you are not getting away with this." So Jerome, purely out of spite, translated all of Origen's homilies on the Gospel of Luke into Latin to demonstrate to people that Ambrose wasn't as good of a preacher as it seemed like. He was just a really good translator from Greek into Latin, but he's not the only one in that game. I can do it too. And I think that is sort of a good example that we've not probably ever succeeded in avoiding the embarrassing, vitriolic, fights that we see, but maybe, and I think this is true, we see them a little bit better and a little bit more frequently now, and it's harder for them to be erased.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's the church. It's a problem the church has always had, but now we're experiencing it differently.
Yeah.
And we're also being exposed to arguments that honestly, probably most of us up until the internet didn't even know that these were arguments. But now that there's become division and people on both sides or whatever the case is, now I think maybe just the regular layperson is now all of this information. They're like, well, I don't know what to do with this. So when they go digging to try to find clarity, it just gets into more confusion. Sometimes maybe they find clarity.
Yeah.
But I think because of that,
That's right.
things are being introduced into our life that probably back then they never would have been exposed to.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't even have to go very far back in time to see the way that those sorts of arguments or that sort of pettiness, even though it was there, it wasn't like the dominant experience that people had. I mean, think early 1900s, some old woman who's going to church every day or just maybe even if it's just on Sundays, right? She probably couldn't have identified the Pope in a lineup of potential figures. It's like, oh, that old guy in the goofy outfit, like I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And she certainly wasn't hearing, did you hear what the Pope said today? Whether it was good or bad, she wasn't hearing it.
Right.
She's just totally unaware. And today, I think we have that same. It's really interesting. My experience with working with parishes and catechists and stuff has been that there is still a group of people who are they just don't know about all of the ugliness and pettiness that goes on. And I kind of wish that I had that sort of innocence that like I didn't know that there was all this fighting. And then there are other people who start out that way, or they're just curious, they want to become Catholic, and maybe they convert and whatever. And then they think, okay, well, now that I've done this, I got to get serious, and I'm going to make it my whole life, which is like good. But their impulse is like, well, I mean, who do I follow on YouTube? Who do I follow on Twitter?
Yeah.
And that can lead them in really weird directions, depending on, honestly, what an algorithm wants to throw at them.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you like hunting and you're interested in the carnivore diet, so you probably want this Catholic influencer stuff because he sort of aligns with that audience.
Isn't it weird that I know like who you're talking about?
And
I
that's
don't wanna name names.
that's gonna take you one direction. Whereas if you had an interest in architecture and classical music, and then you start looking up Catholicism, it might send you an entirely different track.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really weird. And I've talked with priests who have said that they had parishioners who were like daily mass goers who were trying on purpose to get more serious about their faith. They were going to confession, they were going to adoration, they were doing like everything at the parish, and they basically were like, well, I got to find somewhere else some more things to do. So they go to the internet and they got hooked up with certain podcasts, and it actually, instead of helping them become deeper disciples, it made them more anxious and nervous and angry about the state of the church, and they wound up leaving the parish and joining an SSPX chapel and telling that pastor, like, you have departed from the true faith and like you're damaging people. And he's like, boy, okay.
Yeah.
The internet's powerful.
Yeah.
So it's in some ways it's certainly a unique problem, right? But it's not like we've got no experience of anything like this, but there's the technology, which is ultimately, driven by algorithms and driven by making somebody some money somewhere.
Right.
Really makes it harder to just sort of kind of find your way.
Right.
I mean, when you were like getting serious about your faith, whenever that was in your life, when you got more serious in college or whatever, I imagine you've never really talked to me about this, but probably got some recommendations from some people you knew on maybe a couple of books to start with, right? And you knew someone who was invested in your growth as a disciple, and they kind of gave you suggestions and a road to follow, right? That's awesome. And you could find that on the internet, or you could find like, oh, wait, we haven't had a pope in like 80 years. So get out while you still can. And both of those are possibilities. So it's scary in that way.
And there's a lot of different places that we could go with this conversation. And I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about is like, one, as Catholics, as Christians, we can't look at like our behavior on the internet and how we participate in some of the commentary that's going on
we shouldn't be acting different online than we are in the pew. Like, we don't insult people online or treat people poorly. Even as wrong as we feel they may be, it should still be keeping the person on the other side of the screen in mind. The other thing that I think always comes to mind for me too is what you're saying. Like, how do you discern these things? Because there are so many voices. There's so much more commentary, and it's like, well, is it the loudest person in the room? Is it the angriest person in the room? Is it the person with the most followers on Twitter? Like, how do we discern, which voices are the ones that we should be listening to? I mean, ultimately, it's the voice of Jesus. But how can we be better discerning at who we click the follow for and who we're like, that person doesn't lead me to love Jesus more, I actually feel angrier when I listen to this person.
I actually think that's a good test right there, is like the fruits. What is the fruit that this is producing in me? And whether or not what the person says is truth or false, right? Whether it's good or not good, that if it's producing bad fruits in you, then my recommendation would be take a step back. Even if what they have to say is good content or well researched. I mean, I'm not saying that, I would say for anything, whether it's false, it's false, you may not want to listen to it. But if you're not quite sure if it's true, but the fruits that you're seeing in your life are not the fruits of the Spirit, then you actually may not be ready for that. And I think this is something that we have to understand too, is that sometimes when we're exposed to information, like so much of it, when we first hear it, especially if we haven't been well researched or well versed in that particular topic, that now when we're introduced to these things, part of it may seem to make sense and part of it leads to confusion. And so we have this sort of battle within ourselves, like, well, I can see this, but I don't know if I see this. And maybe we're just not ready to hear that. It doesn't necessarily mean that what the person says is false, although it might be if we can't discern between good and evil. Right. But it might just be like our souls are not prepped for that. They're not ready to receive that word. And I think that's something that we have to discern. Like, what information do I actually need to understand and need to know to get to heaven, to fulfill my vocation. So I think a lot of it is, yes, there's good stuff and bad stuff, but there's also stuff that we're just not ready to receive, and we're grasping at trying to understand these things. And when part of it makes sense, but we don't have the clarity or the full understanding, we start grasping so that we can get that, so that we can maybe explain to other people this one part that made sense and maybe this one part that didn't. So I think a lot of it too is we're just individually not at a place to hear that particular piece of information,
right?
And it's hard for us to know that. And so I say, just what fruits is it producing within me?
Yeah, the idea of the fruits is really good, and also that power of discernment. And this is something I've said at a lot of Deanna's marriage retreats when she's asked me to be part of the Q&A panel. Different context completely, but the same point applies. Like, if the only time you're trying to discern something is like, is this really the best person for me to follow on Twitter, or should I be listening to this podcast? But you don't have some kind of actually active prayer life, and you're not like going to confession and like actually doing that kind of work, then your discernment is going to be really lousy. You're not going to make a good decision. Right. If you're only trying to discern, in the moment of decision about something like that, and you don't have anything else that's prepping you for a discernment or laying any foundation, you're going to follow the wrong people, and you're going to get drawn into things that are not helpful to you. But you also, Mickey, you said something really that I had never thought of, whether or not people are ready for it. And I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about like my kids and what they're ready for, what information are they ready for. And this is not even like, well, there's this information out there that's really dangerous and false, and they're not ready for that yet. Even stuff that's true, maybe they're not ready for it yet until they get to a certain maturity, a certain baseline of like, okay, here's the foundation of the basic things that are true. Now let's add a layer of complexity onto that, and it's not going to be as simple as when, I was teaching you this same concept and you were 6. Now, you're 12, and it is a little bit more complex. And that's going to make it seem, for just a second, like, wait a minute. I thought I already knew this. This is not what you taught me. It's like, well, no, it is, but like now you're seeing it deeper. And really, I mean, that's the plan of salvation history. A gradual revelation that the Lord gives to his people, which reaches its fullness in the incarnation, and then ever since then we're still trying to grasp at that reality, and that's so one of the things I would think. I mean, we could probably come back to at the end like some practical rules, but one big one for sure is if you're following a social media personality or a Catholic influencer or whatever, and they don't ever take time to actually talk about Revelation, and I mean like the Bible, not like some obscure private revelation that happened maybe in the 1830s in a small region of France. That's a pretty big sign that they're spending too much of their time on something that is not really all that helpful or not necessary, right? And so if there's not a healthy and frequent like turning back to scriptures, turning back to the basics, then that's one that's a warning sign, So that's something. I think really one basic point that maybe we can sort of launch from now is the fact that there has been certainly a shift in the church's understanding of how to interact with the modern world, and the role of witness hasn't changed, but now we have more places where we're offering that witness, or more contexts where we're offering witness. Yep. So, Paul VI famously said that modern man listens not so much to teachers as to witnesses, and when it does listen to teachers, it's because they are witnesses, and that's very true. I think now in 2023, we're at a point where we can understand that even our online behavior is a form of our witness, or it's not optional, or that we can't separate them. That there ought to be an integrity to the witness we give in our lives, and it includes even the digital sphere. Yeah.
I think in sort of our physical environments, we are a little bit more discerning on where we go, who we listen to, what we take in. And so to think of being online as is this a room that I need to go into? Is this a space where I need to be? Realizing, maybe you think you want to be a witness going into this one room of people who are not going to even be receptive to what you want to hear. So I actually think becoming extremely discerning on where we go, what we do, what we choose to say, and how we choose to say it, totally understanding that people are all at different levels. So as a teacher in a classroom, what I would teach to seniors, I would not use the same language or the same examples as I would to a 5th grader or a 3rd grader or a kindergartner. Right. But that's almost how it's happening in online.
Oh,
right?
You
have all these spaces, and so you have certain people who are speaking have to realize, though, that their audience may be at these different levels of understanding. And two, as a listener, someone who is consuming this stuff, also realizing you know what, I may be entering a 12th grade classroom and I'm not literate enough to be there. So I'm just going to hold back. And I think that that's important. And I really don't know how much thought goes into entering those spaces. Why am I even coming here?
Yeah.
Where we would ask those things. If I was going to go into a grocery store or any sort of store, I would have an idea of what I'm looking for. But I think online we either just stumble into places and our curiosity gets the best of us, or we're not discerning.
They get more brave too with how people speak to each other, and brave isn't the right word. They're not as discerning about the language that's used. And sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's fine.
It's not fine.
I'm not mad. I'm not going to go online and talk about Deanna.
I'm live tweeting this right now.
fight about it in the comm box. But I mean, you think about the way that people have conversations in a Facebook thread or a Twitter thread. Like, it's nasty. And we would never like sit down at a table like this and talk to each other the way that you see some of the conversations around the synod or marriage or Pope Francis or any of the things happening in Catholic culture right now. The way people talk to each other online is very different than sitting at the same table. And like, even backing up from what you were saying, Mickey, it's like, do you even need to walk into those conversations? Like, is it even worth your time? Like, can you be discerning about, is this a waste of your time?
Right.
Or and again, like that call to, is this leading you to holiness or just a real distraction?
And I think too, like, I mean, I don't follow a whole lot of YouTubers or Instagrammers or tweeters, or I don't know what they're called. Anyways, but I also think, like, I know you and I talk about this a lot when we talk about our podcast, is like, who is our audience? So I know when we make content, we're keeping our audience in mind. But there may be people who watch what we do who aren't like our intended audience. So they may not grasp everything that we're talking about. Like, if it comes to parenthood, if they're not a parent or that's not even on their radar. So I think too, even as consumers, we also need to pay attention to the people that we are watching or listening to. Are we their intended audience? Because if we aren't their intended audience, then I'm not even in the space where I could even be open to receiving what they have to say,
a really good
because
point.
their message isn't for me. Now, do I think every content creator then should be like spend so much time discerning? I don't know. They should spend time discerning, but I also but I also think, like, realizing, like, I would say a lot of the successful ones know who their audience is. And they're speaking to that. And so if someone chooses to take part in that round table, but
If
they're
you're
not
not
the
that
intended audience, to know that there's going to be things that probably pop up in your soul that's, you're like, whoa, I'm not ready for this. Well, if you're not the intended audience, most likely you're not ready for it. And that wasn't for you. So I think the responsibility falls on both the creators and their receivers.
And the consumer,
Because if I was going to go into a patristics class, like a PhD course, and I haven't even taken like your Basics 101, you know, my level of understanding or even to be able to grasp what the person's trying to convey is going to be minimal. And so I think we have to be humble enough to say,
that's not for me.
That's not for me.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think is really a big motivation for us wanting to have this conversation, do this episode, is this document from the Dicastery for Communications. It came out May 28th of this year. And, you know, nobody seems to have read it, as far as I can tell. It's called Towards Full Presence, a pastoral reflection on engagement with social media. And there's, to me, there's a lot of stuff that's interesting about the document. It's only 20 pages. It's not that long. But two sort of really big shifts. And one is this acknowledgement that just the media in general has completely transformed in the last maybe 15 years, or I don't know, maybe you could push it a little bit farther back, but there's been media for a while, and now we're in a new media era, which is characterized by the conversation, by media being a conversation or a dialogue and not a monologue. And you can even see a sense of this. The Vatican every year releases a message for World Communications Day or Week or something. It's one of those holidays I don't really celebrate, but they have, there's a papal document for it every year. And they changed the title, and I'm not actually sure what year. It used to be the Message for World Day of Communications. And now it's the message for the World Day or Week or whatever of social communications. And so the transition from media to new media, where there is not just a unidirectional monologue like me when I'm talking on y'all's podcast and I never ask you questions, but an actual conversation where we're engaged in going back and forth, is really a substantive shift. And there's this really cool image that I think it's from NBC that it shows St. Peter's Square after the death of John Paul II. And it's obviously a whole lot of people, and there's like a little bit of candles, whatever, some light. And then a few, then the next image is side by side with it, St. Peter's Square when Pope Francis was announced. And the entire square is illuminated by screens from cell phones and iPads with people holding them up to take a picture of the Pope as he comes out. And, I mean, Pope John Paul II died in 2005. It wasn't like that was 40 years ago. Right. So from 2005 to 2013, certainly within that time frame, a huge shift took place. This document kind of highlights some of that, some of the implications for that, and I just want to point one of them out. And it's this idea that because there's this conversation always happening, it always feels like we're missing out on something, like we've got to catch up. If you've ever really taken a break from social media for whatever period, Lent, Advent, or you just got sick of it and deleted the app for a while, and then you come back, I think we all feel like, well, what's going on? What's the new thing? Like, oh, is there a dress that people are arguing about, whether it's green or blue or yellow or whatever the colors are, or what's the latest, stupid dance trend that I don't understand and that I don't know the name of, but people are doing when they score touchdowns. Like, what have I missed? And a lot of what we've missed is nothing. So listen to this quotation. This is from paragraph 33 of this document. In this environment, the social media environment, our attention is not focused as we attempt to navigate this overwhelming information and social interaction network. Instead of focusing on one issue at a time, our continuous partial attention rapidly passes from one topic to the other. In our always-on condition, we face the temptation to post instantly, since we are physiologically hooked on digital stimulation, always wanting more content in endless scrolling and frustrated by any lack of updates. One significant cognitive challenge of digital culture is the loss of our ability to think deeply and purposefully. We scan the surface and remain in the shallows instead of deeply pondering realities. Staying in the shallows instead of going into the deep water reminds me of John Paul II, Duke in Altum, set out into deep waters. You can't set out into deep waters if you're stuck kicking around in the kiddie pool, because that's all you have the time to focus on.
I think sometimes when we're looking at social media or being receivers of the content that's being given to us, sometimes we do get raw video that people are just recording without any context. Sometimes we get a really edited, pristine version. And because we as consumers don't see what's happening on the other end, it's really easy to take things out of context. But I actually think it's really good, at least for our podcast, because we know our audience is mostly moms, parents, people trying to live the practical life, that they see it play out in real life. But I think that that's always an aspect that social media is just not capable of doing. It's really hard to dive into the deep waters, like to think that we watch something or we receive some content. Like, we have to take what we receive and to actually dive into deep waters. Like, that's where we have to, the consumer, after we take it in, like, okay, what was it about? What was true? What was not? What is beneficial? Was any of it beneficial, and how am I supposed to apply that? Because ultimately that's what we need to be doing as Christians. Like you said, like, our time is something we can never get back. And what we have now, like I just heard a homily from our priest this past Sunday. He's like, time is something that we don't get back. And our time should be dedicated to our eternal destination. So is what we're doing honoring and giving glory to God? Is it participating in spiritual leisure or leisure that's not bad? Is it benefiting my soul? Is this honoring the time that God has so graciously given me at this moment? And it takes taking that content in and really sort of diving into that. Is this a way that I should be spending my time? And I think that's how we get into the deep waters, is really taking that like we would any sort of form of information, whether it's a book or anything else, like now processing that information and figuring out what is it that I'm meant to do with this, if anything. if I'm meant to do anything with this information.
Yeah. I think the particular challenge of social media is that it has this, it's going to sound like a contradiction, but it's always there and you can't put your finger on it. Like, it's always around, giving you this, it's technologically designed that way to give you a dopamine hit. It's algorithmically going to try and feed you stuff that it thinks you want. I reset probably once a month or every other month or something. I just wipe out my history on Facebook of videos I've watched or pages I've visited or whatever. And it's really interesting to watch it try and respond to, oh, you cleared it out. We don't know. What do you like? Do you like farming or something? Or it's like a complete guess. And then what I'll notice is after a few weeks or a couple months or something, it's like, I'm getting an awful lot of vintage baseball videos, and that's fine, but it's getting to be a little bit much. Let me just reset this and see what it's sort of like a game, like what happens next. But it's always there. And you can't ever sort of identify, like, what good is this for me? Or if something's getting annoying to you or, like, causing you to have, frustrations and anger, you can't put your finger on exactly why in the same way that you could if you said, okay, I bought this book because everyone was talking about it, and I read it, and it's terrible. And look, on page 97, there is this fallacious argument followed by this spurious reasoning in chapter 3, and you can dissect it because it's like a concrete thing that you can flip and go back to and see again. And when you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, if something about it aggravates you, or an author or content producer or influencer starts to sort of give bad fruits in your life, it's real difficult to say, like, okay, on their episode from October 7th, at the 7-minute 48-second mark, see, he said this. And then last September, he said this at, it's not as easy to do that. Mm-hmm. And so you just are left with this sort of vague sensation of that, like, I don't know what it is, but I'm frustrated. Yeah. So it's always there. And you can't figure out what it is that it's doing to you.
Right. And like what we were saying at the beginning of the episode, that, that the things that we're consuming online, the people that we're engaging with or following, if they're not leading us closer to Christ, then it is a voice that needs to really be silenced. I mean, and the mute button on Facebook, chef's kiss.
Oh, yeah, the 30-day,
and Twitter.
The 30-day one?
Yeah, take a 30-day break from somebody.
30-day thing.
It's so great.
I didn't even know about it.
Yes.
And as far as I know, you can't find a list of the people you've put on your 30-day whatever. Exactly. They just disappear for a while.
And then they come back and you're like, oh, yeah. You.
But we can give them a chance.
We can give them a chance.
Another chance.
So it's like practicing charity there. But and I think, maybe even particularly as moms, looking at Instagram and seeing like the clean living rooms and the perfect motherhood and how Catholicism should look within the home. There can be places and spaces that lead us to deeper holiness in that and really affirm our role. There can be other spaces that may bring shame and all of that. And I think what we're trying to say is like having an awareness when we're engaging with these spaces and not, mindlessly scrolling. Because it is so tempting to just sit and swipe from video to video, and you go from cat and puppy videos to who knows what, people yelling and, doing weird dances and stuff like that. But to really have that at the forefront of our mind is like, and it's a very simplistic thought, but is this leading me to holiness? And if I do feel called to engage, to evangelize, to recognize that will only go so far. I know that there are people who will say like, oh, well, Bishop Barron is the reason why I became Catholic because I watched all of his videos and all of that. But even there were people that had to get involved, like with RCIA, like it always leads to a human connection. Yeah. And so, in the modern age and as we're engaging online and in person, but just to think about is all of this leading back to community? Is it all leading back to Christ? And yeah, are we aware of like how God is moving through all of that?
Yeah. No, I think, and what I found interesting about this argument, and maybe you would have something else to say about it, because I totally understand how when it talks about like algorithms, you're sort of getting people in your same boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that may like leave the other that you're not being exposed to.
Right.
I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. I kind of like that. One reason I get on social media, well, not because I don't want to engage in the other, but if I'm getting on social media, I know that my intent is not to evangelize. Like, that's not why I'm doing it.
Yep. Yeah.
My intention is like, I follow a lot of homeschool moms because I'm a homeschool mom. I'm trying to get organized. So I follow some organization people who give me tips and tricks. So I like that those always come into my feed.
Yeah.
Right.
But I also understand that if we do, so I don't know, I'm feeling torn about this whole issue, because the idea, like, I go into sort of the online community because there's things in my life that I'm not an expert on that I am seeking.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the sameness. When there's something totally random, I'm like, I don't get angry. I'm just like, I just swipe past it.
Yeah.
So, but I know in there it talked a little bit about that. So where does someone fall?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's actually this document, Towards Full Presence, again, Dicastery for Communication, May 28th, 2023. It draws a lot on Pope Francis's encyclical from, I think, 2021, Fratelli Tutti. And in Fratelli Tutti, the sort of like the central feature of that is Pope Francis giving kind of a reflection on the parable of the Good Samaritan. So there's the man on the side of the road and all these people passing him by, and no one wants to care for him. And then finally the Samaritan does, and takes him to an inn, gives money, and says, if you need any more, when I come back, I'm good for it. And he really latches onto that parable for so much of his arguments and concerns in Fratelli Tutti, which is like everyone's like universal brotherhood, or I don't know what the English translation is, and it's Italian instead of Latin anyway. So whatever. It's Fratelli has to do with fraternity, with brotherhood. Tutti means like all or everyone. He sees that parable as a call to communion with everyone. That in some sort of fundamental way, as human persons, we are called to communion. And that's a basic sort of metaphysical understanding of the human person from a Catholic perspective, is that we don't exist as isolated individuals. Yes. We're called to communion. Now, some of those types of communion are going to take priority over others, like your family, right? You better have a better communion with your family than you do with me or Deanna. Even though you and Deanna have a great communion, you've got your own families, but it doesn't erase our responsibility and our call to be that neighbor for someone else. And Pope Francis says this, and it also is in the document here for Towards Full Presence. We, at various times, are that person on the side of the road that needs a neighbor to come to us. At some point and in some kind of context, maybe you haven't actually been homeless, and bereft of all your possessions, just laying there in a ditch. But you've been in a position where you needed someone because, and not even because they could give you anything, but just because you need their presence in your life, right? And so we have a call to be that good Samaritan for others. And I think that the way that works out on the internet is, it doesn't mean that like you need, like I need to follow Katy Perry or whoever's popular. That's probably a terrible example of whoever. I don't know when she was popular, like 2009 or something. Who's the Taylor Swift?
Yes.
Okay, like I don't have a responsibility to follow Taylor Swift to sort of like, fulfill my Christian obligation, but I shouldn't isolate people. That this is the way I try and do it. If I have met someone and actually gotten to know them in some reasonable way, and they add me as a friend on Facebook, I will accept it, even if I know this person's coming from a totally different worldview. They're agnostic, atheist, whatever, and their politics are different than me. They don't even like sports. They're just interested in totally different stuff. I will accept it and try my best. It's a very small thing to occasionally just interact with them in like a pleasant and charitable way. I'm also I used to have a blog and I would write about whatever's the latest thing in the news making me mad as a Catholic. And I really thought I was going to help, fix something. It was like a hobby to write or whatever. And I did it a lot for a long time. And I thought that was well, this Catholicism thing means something. So I got to tell people about it and explain it. And so for a while, that was what my social media looked like. And I've since, slowly, I've kind of taken a different perspective that what I'm posting on Facebook, I don't want to draw someone into an argument. I mean, I think they know what I do for a living. Yeah. They see me, taking pictures with my kids at Holy Week. They see our Holy Week of Darkness stuff and asking people for prayers every now and then, whatever. They have an awareness that if they really want something from me in those regards, they can ask. And every now and then I do get old students or random people that I'm really not that great of friends with that are like, hey, I don't know who else to talk to about this. Can you pray for me or give me some advice or whatever here and there? So I guess the long answer to your question would be that it's okay to craft your sort of crew and your crowd and to have some sort of boundaries about what you're trying to do on social media. But it's also important not to just willfully exclude, especially people you actually do know from some context. I don't know much about the rodeo world that you have been a part of, right? But if there's rodeo people that are not Catholic, they're not homeschooler moms, and they're not into, what was the thing you said, organization, right? You could probably still be friends with them, and you may have something every now and then to share that they're going to appreciate. Mickey is the creator of the single most successful piece of social media content the St. Philip Institute has ever put out that got over 1 million views. And it was a little Canva sheet on how to pray at home during COVID when everything was shut down, right? It was the gentlest piece of evangelical content we've ever put out.
Thanks, guys.
I mean, it called you to do 2 or 3 basic things, and we just shared it once. Hey, here's some suggestions. You might want to try it. And it went like wildfire. And there have been other projects that we invested weeks of strategy into, and we put it out there, and it's like, oh yeah, nobody cares about this. Cool. All right, dang. So you never know.
That's true, but
the impact you're gonna have.
But at the same time, everyone was going through the same pandemic at the same time, so we knew that the same need was there for every single person, which I think made it a little bit easier. But I also think that's what makes it a little bit more challenging when you're content creators, because you're just kind of taking your own view of things that you've learned, and in putting that into an audience that may not understand that world, or they're not all living the same experience. But during the pandemic, I think that's why it went over so well, because everyone was experiencing that same thing. So anyway, that was so kind of you to say. I feel like I'm rambling now, but
it was so good.
It was awesome. We were checking our stats, man. We got more hits on our Facebook page than the Augustine Institute and Catholic Answers, I think, combined in that month. And we were like, yeah, we got 3,000 followers, and we outdid you guys. So
see, that's a healthy example of using the internet. So this is a really helpful conversation. I think the last thing that just comes to mind for me is thinking about your witness, kind of going to what you were saying, Luke, and you post pictures of your kids. People know that you're Catholic. I think the same with us. It's not like we're posting gospel reflections every day on our personal pages, but when people can see your joyful witness, that
includes your online presence. If you're constantly posting things that incite anger
inflammatory,
or how this person is the enemy or that person, or, you know, how dare they do XYZ. But if you can be a joyful witness, you know, in your everyday life, including your presence online, it is shocking how God can use that. Because I have also had the experience of people, I didn't even remember that we were Facebook friends, but we went to school together years ago, and they've reached out and said, you know, they had a question about NFP, or because they knew that, you know, that was something that I was interested in, or just made a comment about how cute my kids are, or how joyful our family look, even in the midst of a lot of chaos. So to realize like that God can use that, and to be discerning and being an instrument. But this episode has been a product of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. Our producer, like, big shout out to Mark and Marina and Liz Slayton. Like, it took a group effort for us to get through this episode today. Thank y'all for your patience.
Anytime.
So yeah, our St. Philip Institute challenge will be, how many changes did you notice in this episode? How many times did we pause? How many wardrobe changes? Did you notice that a baby showed up? But really grateful to be able to have this conversation. Mickey, can you tell them about the upcoming book study that we have?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, and I don't have my book with me, but Deanna and I, for the next 3 weeks, are going to be doing, or next 3 podcasts, we're going to be doing the book study on Sister Josephine's Hope and Invitation. And we will have a link to that in the show notes. We have a reading schedule and a little reflection book. And so we hope that you will join us. We're very excited to read this book together and to walk with you as we explore and deepen our understanding of hope and how to live that out, how to be people of hope. So am I missing anything?
No, that'll be good. We'll have everything in the show notes, like we said. Luke, thank you so much for joining us.
I love it.
Luke has his own podcast, the St. Philip Institute podcast. It's for intellectuals. No, it's very good. It's really, really good.
I hope they're not too intellectual. I'm the host, so.
And do you want to tell people about intothechariot.com?
Oh, sure, yeah. So one of the things that I was, received as sort of a goal is in the Constitution that Bishop Strickland wrote to sort of kick off the Institute. There's this discussion about providing online formation opportunities especially for catechists, but not just for catechists in our diocese. And so especially over the last year, I've really been putting a lot of time and energy into developing a platform where people can take little courses. It's not super fancy, but it's pretty decent, which is a great commercial. It's intothechariot.com. There's courses. We have the Way of Christ, which actually is pretty full-bodied as a course. There's 26 videos, and that's in English and in Spanish now, which I'm really happy about. There's a course on the Eucharist and the Catechism. There's baptism formation prep, a course on the virtues that they're actually in. We had a podcast episode about that. There are courses, one already published on Vatican II, and many more sort of small courses. And a lot of these are maybe 2 or 3 videos of 20 to 30 minutes in length. There's a quiz, certificates, that sort of thing. So if you're interested in finding a little bit more out about the stuff that we've been doing or that I've been working on, that's a good place to go. And it's free, because I am not a great capitalist. So I'm just giving it away and spending money getting those things onto the internet. So it's only costing me a little bit of money every year, and I'm not charging for it. So if you want to donate, there is a link to donate.
That was pretty good.
That was excellent.
And it's pretty decent. Again, remember, pretty decent.
Excellent. Well, we always close these episodes in prayer. So Luke, would you close us?
Sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we give you thanks for the conversation that we were able to have today, and for the gift that you've given to us in the incarnation of Christ. We've got Andre here to remind us of Christ's presence as a baby. You became a baby for us, and you became man for us so that we might become like gods, as St. Irenaeus says. So we give thanks for your presence among us. We give thanks for the gift of your church, the sacraments, the Holy Spirit, and all the things that you give to us. Sinners that we are, you died for us, and so we give thanks. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.